So last night I impulsively cut my hair based on this video about how to get a Marilyn Monroe haircut. It was because I was watching one of Marilyn Monroe's old movies and I realized her hair is so fabulous. And I have bleach blonde hair, so why am I not doing my hair like hers? So anyway, I cut my hair, I took a ruler and I put it on my head and I pulled each piece out and I snipped it at the 5-inch mark. Actually, I think I went for 6 inches. And then I put it in rollers and I put some setting lotion in and I curled it, and this is my new hairstyle. Welcome to my video. My name is Jane. I like to sew clothes out of secondhand materials, and today I'm making an 1860s corset out of a pair of men's khakis. It's not actually an 1860s corset because it's going to be made in 2025, obviously, but it's based on an 1860s corset pattern. It's based on a pattern that is based on an 1860s corset. So it has the style of an 1860s corset, and we're about 2 seconds into this video and I've already said 1860s corset too much. Anyway, I think it's gonna be cool. The reason that I'm making this corset is because I am making a pincushion costume for myself for Halloween. Yeah, it's gonna be pretty kitschy and pretty cool, and that's gonna be next week's video, but I wanted the silhouette of this dress that I'm making to be a strapless silhouette with a very stark reduction at the waist, just for stylistic emphasis on the skirt, which is going to be the pincushion part of the outfit. So I thought this would be a good time to test out some new sewing techniques to actually make a corset based on a corset pattern instead of just freeballing it like I've done in the past. I'm using stainless steel boning, I'm using a busk, I'm using hopefully some kind of actual correct lacing pattern at the back of the corset. I'll explain all of that as we go along, so let's just jump into the video. The khakis that I bought are 100% cotton twill, which is perfect because twill is one of the fabrics that's recommended to create corsets. The fabrics recommended for corsets are just really densely woven with 0% stretch so that they can withstand the pressing your body. Cotilles are really good, twills are recommended. Sometimes duck canvas is recommended, which is really stiff. And then there are like fashion fabrics you could use to decorate your corset. Like I've seen cotton sateens, silk sateens, satins. So I'm not sure what I'll do if I'm gonna do a decorative layer. I'm pretty sure my pattern could be a 1-layer corset. But this is gonna be the structure of my corset. These are Dockers, 100% cotton, made in Mexico. And they're gonna be a corset. Thank you to my dad who printed out my pattern for me at his office on very large paper. He saved me quite a bit of time in terms of cutting out the pattern and then piecing it all together. So this pattern is by Red Threaded Corsetry. I found their account through Little Blossom Darling on Instagram. She has recommended this exact gored corset pattern. She makes a lot of amazing historical reproduction clothing, and I highly recommend you go follow her on Instagram. I have here my 6 pattern pieces cut out. Yeah, it's only 6 pattern pieces, which is not very many. So I think it's time to sit down, read through the instructions, and actually figure out a game plan for sewing this corset. As I cut apart the pants to save the zipper, button, and any other notions I think I might use in the future, let's chat about the actual pattern. This corset is designed to only need 1 single layer of strength fabric in order to make it be a functioning corset. The pattern outlines what fabrics are recommended, and they list out all of the lengths of boning as well as width you'll need for this pattern, which is tremendously helpful for somebody who's not done a whole lot of this before. Essentially, the corset needs straight steel boning and spiral steel boning, and I ordered all of mine from Wallwack, which is just kind of a bulk supplier that I've used before to buy zippers online. I think it's important to note that while this is a reproduction of a historical pattern, the techniques outlined in the pattern are not historical. This is entirely sewn by machine. If you choose, you can obviously do whatever you want by hand, but that's really nice because while I'm interested in silhouettes and techniques used in historical clothing, I'm not so much at this point in time interested in sewing garments entirely by hand. I cut out all of my pattern pieces from my pants, making sure to line up the grain lines. So I cut out all of my pattern pieces, and this is the back piece. That's tiny. That is half of my back. I'm a bit dubious. I know it's gonna lace up the back, and there's a bust at the front of this corset, but I would really prefer to have some kind of insert in between the gap. If there's a gap at the back, I really don't want there to be a gap on my skin. So we'll see what we can do about that. I decided to cut out all of my pattern pieces from a very simple cotton muslin, not to do a double layered corset, but just to add a little bit of structure to the twill that I was using, just in case it wasn't enough. Now, if you watch a video, what not to do when you sew, the number one tip people are gonna give you is don't skip ironing. Press, 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 press. And it's true, you gotta press. I ironed my twill and my cotton muslin together. This isn't a form of basting, but it does kind of just make sure they're perfectly flat and flush. I then began tracing out all of the boning channels onto all of my pattern pieces. I cannot recommend enough buying a tracing wheel if you're going to make this pattern. The pattern pieces are not transparent, so you kind of have to play a game of pulling them down, pulling them up, making markings, using a ruler to connect your markings. Overall, just would have been easier if I had a tracing wheel. After I traced out all of my lines for the boning channels, I went ahead and stitched them in place. At this point, I kind of assumed this corset would be more of a mock-up, an underlayer. It wouldn't look too pretty from the outside, so I didn't even bother basting. I knew that these stitches were in for good. So the reason that I really chose to buy this corset pattern versus any other is that it has gussets at the bust and at the hip. The gussets at the bust are triangle shaped and the ones at the hip are really funky shaped, but they work. They look really good. I marked the lines where I would slash open the bust gussets, and I didn't have to mark anything at the hip, but I'm also kind of wondering, is gore the adjective form of gusset? Like you have a gusset, therefore it's a gored garment? I really have no idea, but very interesting. So actually, gore is a verb that means pierce or stab with a horn or tusk. Example, he was gored to death by a charging bull. But gored also is an adjective meaning shaped with a gore or gores, like a gored skirt. So gore is a noun interchangeable with gusset. That is quite irrelevant to the construction of my corset because it was time to insert the busk. This was exciting. This was a new sewing skill for me. I marked the placement of the hooks on the busk on the right side of the corset. I then stitched the bust facing right sides together with the right side of the corset, leaving gaps where I had marked the hooks. I then cut waist tape out of this synthetic gross grain ribbon that's about 1 inch wide. I cut this waist tape a little bit longer than the length or width of the corset, with the front attached to the back. They were just pinned together. They weren't actually attached yet, and I did the same for the other side. I then stitched this waist tape in at the seam of the facing that I had just sewn in, but I didn't attach it to the front of the corset. It was not visible. I was honestly a bit shocked to see that the hook side of the busk fit pretty well into what I had sewn. I thought there would for sure be a little bit of misalignment, but it was good. So I inserted it, and then I used my zipper foot to stitch the facing down as close as possible to the busk just to keep it in place. This was difficult and I didn't do it perfectly, and I think I could improve. For the stub or the knob side of the busk, I lined up the two fronts of my corset together and I just marked holes where the hooks needed to go. I sewed the facing onto the left side of the corset before inserting the knob side of the busk, and then I used my awl to make little holes just in the right side of the fabric, the front side of the fabric, where the stubs needed to go through. I did watch a video about how to insert a busk because I was just a bit confused how I could get metal and fabric to work together, and the video that I watched had the knob side of the busk going in first and then the hook side, so I'm not quite sure if there's a way that's easier. This worked quite well for me, and it seems like this corset was taking a lot of time, but I was really enjoying it. I've always been the kind of person who associates nitpicky sewing with just annoying sewing. I haven't always appreciated having to line up everything perfectly in order to make the garment look even somewhat okay and not just good, but I'm starting to really enjoy patterns that require precision. I'm starting to enjoy marking things up absolutely perfectly. A millimeter off is a millimeter off, and it will affect the final fit of your garment, especially with a corset, which is very tightly fitted. Once I had stitched the facing down for the button side of the busk, I moved on to the bust grommets. Not grommets, gores. Not gores, gussets. There are so many weird G words associated with this corset. Okay, to insert the bust gussets, I first folded down the edges of the slits that I had made by 1/8 of an inch. I made these folds as small as possible. I then inserted the gussets, which had been stay stitched as well as edge stitched, in, I made the straight side point inwards towards the inside of the bust. The gussets were stitched in with a stitch that was 1/8 of an inch away from the edge of the folded slit, and then another 1/8 of an inch away, so there were 2 stitches. It looked like a pretty solid double lined top stitch. That was not a correct sewing word. I recommend that you purchase this pattern and use the pattern instructions because they explained all this really well. At this point, I could kind of tell what the corset was gonna look like, and I was loving it. That's always such a fun part in the project, when you can tell that it's actually gonna be something, not just a 2-dimensional piece of fabric. Also, the color of this khaki was so soothing to me as I was working on it. I've never been a brown person. I've never worked with brown. I've never even worn brown before, but this just felt like a really nice cup of hot chocolate on a very cold day while you're still in bed in the covers and you're reading a really good book. Okay, anyway, I started putting my boning channels in with this 1/2 inch wide twill tape. Boy, sometimes it is such a luxury to just use a pattern because all the boning channels were marked so to be 1/2 inch wide, and then they recommend you buy 1/4 inch wide boning, so it fits so well if you just use 1/8 of an inch stitch on your twill tape that's 1/2 inch wide. Oh, all fits together so nicely. I carefully stitched all my boning channels down except for the ones that needed to cross the hip gusset, and then I inserted this gusset. A lot of the pattern pieces for this corset are stitched down and then top stitched, which leads to a really clean flat surface, which I really appreciated. I added my last couple of boning channels over the hip gusset, and then I realized that something was just not quite adding up. I did in fact just realize as I was getting ready to put my very last boning channels in this corset that I think I put the back on upside down, because if you look at this back piece right here, the waist is marked in this double line and the top of it is swoopy. I thought the top is probably straight, so I just put it in like that. No harm done, I just have to take the hip gusset out and redo it. And I'm gonna check the reference photos on the website just to make sure that I did in fact do that wrong. But it makes sense because my channels that I had marked on the gusset are not matching up with the channels on the bodice, and I thought maybe I just marked the channels wrong. I think I just put the top on backwards, or upside down, but that's okay. I could be wrong, but I don't think so. Anyway, that's how it's looking so far. Oh yeah, I did it wrong. The swirly part of the back is at the top, but it goes up towards the back, which is interesting and also is not gonna work for my dress. Maybe that's the way they did it in the 1860s, but that is not gonna work for my dress. So let's make some changes to the pattern. Okay, actually, the entire gusset is now sewn on wrong. It's overhanging like 1 inch, which means I just need to take the whole thing off and resew it, which is totally fine. It's just good to know. I feel like I'm now realizing that I put this whole thing together wrong, but that is cool. I pinned the waist tape in place at the waist seam now that the fronts and backs were put together correctly, and then I put in my last couple of boning channels, which extended from the top of the corset all the way down to the bottom of the hip gusset. I finished the bottom edge of the corset with some handmade bias tape, and then I got started shoving my boning into the channels. I used straight steel boning when it said use straight steel, and I used spiral steel for the 2 boning channels on the side, as well as one of the diagonal ones closest to the bust. Not the one closest to the bust, but like second closest. It does outline all of this in the pattern. Once all of my bones were in place, I secured the top edge of the corset with another piece of bias binding. I made sure to fold this under at the center of the bodice because this was going to be basically a finished edge, and then I slip stitch all of my binding closed on the underside of the corset. Has anybody else seen a YouTube video that's been filmed this much on an ironing board? I mean, it's getting a little bit excessive, but we finished the front pieces of our corset, and now we just have to do the lacing strips and attach it all together. One of the biggest rules for pattern adjustment is if you adjust one piece and it connects to another piece, make the same adjustment on the connecting piece. For me, this meant just taking out a few inches out of the top of the lacing strip. I cut this out and then I put the lacing strips together. I just folded these in half and sewed the boning channels in place. The bones were put inside of these and then I used bias tape to finish them like the bodice. Alrighty guys, I'm at the closing steps, the finishing steps of my corset, but I'm deviating from the pattern instructions. I snipped off the top of the back of the corset so that it's no longer this shape. I just want to have a straight upper back to be hidden underneath my dress, my pincushion dress, which I'm kind of getting a little nervous to sew, but that is beside the point. So I snipped off the back. I made these shorter because these are my lacing strips. And I realized that the straight steel boning I bought for the lacing strips would be too long, so I had to use plastic. The plastic boning is terrible. I've already given it a little bit of an iron. I just don't want to melt it, but it's not lying flat. So, but it is what it is. I'm gonna put this under something heavy tonight and try to flatten it out, but for now I'm gonna keep working on it as is. I've also marked the holes where grommets would typically go, but I'm not using grommets because I don't have a grommet installer and I don't want to purchase one until I'm ready to get a nice one. So I'm going to be doing eyelets by hand. I've done this before and it worked really well, and I'm just going to use some cream colored embroidery thread to match my bias tape, and I'll just spend probably a fair amount of time doing that. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 eyelets to do on each of the lacing strips. Also, I made a modesty panel. This is going to be attached when I attach my lacing strips. This was just made with the same fabric. There's no bias. I mean, there's no like cotton in here anywhere. This will just go at the back, essentially like this, so that it covers up my skin whenever I lace up the corset. Besides that, I think I'm getting really close to being done. Alrighty guys, we're getting up and close and personal so I can show you how to do an eyelet by hand. There are several very good tutorials on YouTube for how to do this. I've looked up a few over the course of the year. Like any other eyelet or grommet placement, you're going to need to use an awl to make a hole in your fabric. The point of using this is to not tear the fibers, the threads of your fabric, to just spread them apart so that there's minimal fraying. Using 6-stranded embroidery floss that's been split in half and then doubled up when sewing, I put the needle in to the left or right of the hole on the underside of the fabric and then run it through the hole a couple of times just to create a stabilizing stitch. I do this in the pattern of a cross, and then I just make my way around the hole that I've poked, putting my needle through the hole and then pulling it back up like a fingernail's width away from the hole. You're going to want to use your awl to continue to open up your hole and make sure it stays open. I've always had issues with this in the past. The hole just ends up being basically non-existent. I spent a decent chunk of time doing 10 of these on each of my lacing strips, and then I just attached these to my corset right sides together. I'll save my critiques for later, but I didn't really like this way of attaching the lacing strips. It just felt like I didn't really want that raw edge being open in the garment. I would have preferred to encase it in some way, but it is what it is and it does work, and it was quite simple. The very last step to finishing this corset was actually lacing it up. I just used this little ribbon that I had lying around. It was maybe 4 feet long, maybe 5 feet long. I pinned the middle of it to my ironing board and then I got started lacing. Following the tutorial that's actually linked in the pattern and is on Red Threaded's YouTube, I laced each side from the bottom to the top of the eyelets. I went all the way down to the waist where there's 2 holes which are really close together, and I skipped the top hole of the 2 holes that are really close together and I went to the bottom hole. Staying on the same side, I then took the ribbon and went through the top hole, and then from the waist down, I laced each side from the top to the bottom of the corset. I simply tied off the bottom in a knot and my corset was laced. This is called the bunny ears method, and it leaves you with the loops at the waist that you can just pull yourself and tighten yourself. And trust me, it works. I put this thing on myself and then I pulled it and my waist was entirely closed and I didn't need anybody to help me, which was really nice. And here we have an 18th century or 19th century corset made out of men's khakis. There we go, there we go. Now it's closed. I think it's quite cool that I made a corset out of men's business pants, but I do have some notes and some things that I will definitely be changing for future versions of this corset. So this is meant to go underneath a dress. It is the understructure of a dress. And the busk is metal, which means it's gonna cause some issues when I try to put it underneath a layer of velvet. I'm not sure what I'm gonna do to solve that. Maybe put in a layer of cardboard at the center of the bodice of my dress, maybe just pad it in some way. Either way, it creates difficulty which really shouldn't need to be created. So if I was gonna create any other corset that goes underneath a dress, I would not put a busk in there. It does, however, make it really easy to lace it up myself, which is very nice. My second note is that I don't like the way the lacing strips are attached to the corset. They are finished before they're attached, and the corset is finished before they're attached. So you have these weird corners that just look honestly kind of unprofessional. I know that they could be serged, and it is what it is. It's going underneath the dress, so what does it matter? It's just in future, I would find a way to do that differently. I also put in a modesty panel, just like a little panel fabric to cover up the gap at the back because I thought there would be a gap, but there was no gap. So I feel like, again, the corset was just a bit big at the waist. It also said in the pattern that it would reduce your waist by up to 5 inches. And I had a 26-inch waist before I made the corset, and after the corset, my waist was still like a 20, it was like a 25. So I just don't know how that works. It fits really, really well. I love the fit of the pattern. It's amazing that it fits me and I didn't have to make any changes besides just cutting off the back, but that wasn't a fit change, that was just a stylistic change. I just am unsure why the back is meeting at the back. I don't feel like that should happen. It definitely took me several hours to do my eyelets by hand. If corsets are about to be a large part of my sewing practice, I'm just gonna get a grommet installer. It's really not that expensive, and I'll learn how to install grommets. Yeah, the eyelets by hand look pretty cool. It's just they're very, very time intensive, and it's not really something I feel like dramatically adds to the corset. My last note is that the twill that I bought that was part of these men's business pants was totally perfect for the corset. I have no notes. It is very structured. It holds up pretty well. It hasn't frayed too badly, and I've just zigzag stitched the edges. So honestly, pretty solid fabric. If you're looking to make a corset and you don't want to go to a fabric store, just head to your local thrift store and find a pair of khakis. If you've made it this far in the video, please don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps me out a lot. I love talking about sewing online, and I genuinely feel like YouTube is the best place to do it. It's not addictive in the way that short form content is. Anyway, I hope you have a lovely day, and let me know what you're working on below. I would love to know. Stay tuned because next week I will be making my Halloween costumes, and they're gonna be so good. All right, I'll see you guys. Leave a comment if you want me to make a ball gown out of men's pants. Not jeans, like men's business pants. Because I'll do it. It would be really good. I would use the zippers as decorative trim. I would use the buttons and form some kind of like layer at the bust. I would probably do some patchwork, maybe try to do some gradient. I mean, there are honestly so many different kinds of brown business pants. It's crazy. It could be so good. And there would be a petticoat, maybe some ruffles. Leave a comment if you think I should do that.